Welcome everybody. This is Ken Charmer from sunny Spain, joined by Lee Shapiro from
sunny Hackensack,
and Dominic Paradise from
Amityville.
Well, we're fortunate in having two musical stars tonight because we've got, not only have we got a musical director, but we've actually got a wedding singer.
When are they showing up?
Wedding singer.
When will they be here?
I'm sorry, Dominic, but that's
worse.
That's meant as a compliment. We also have Tony Colatrella, and we have Chuck Charles Walker.
Charles, how are you, Charles? How are things?
From the West Coast, giving us the other side of the coast perspective.
No, I've changed it.
Oh, there he is.
Okay, and now we have Mike Derrico joined us just in time.
Oh, then I'm out. Done.
For the introduction.
Well, so I'm out too if you're out.
Welcome all. And just as an intro, I have some news about the work we're doing with Snapper, and there's good news and bad news. The good news is that it is coming out. The bad news is because it's all because of Al Stewart that we don't know when. Because there's a 50 CD Al Stewart box set blocking the pipeline, and that's coming out on June the 2nd. And the Four Seasons box set will have to follow. So it may be September, it may be October. But
it's not even terrible. It's not even terrible. It's like we call that on time.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, it's only just over. It'll only be just over 4 years since we started. And I went down to Snapper's studios, and they said, "What do you want, Ken?" So anyway, we'll see.
It's destined to win. So
it will. It will. So that's the news on the Snapper box set, and obviously I'm waiting for news from them regarding the final contents and everything else. But we also have expanded our communications and news and research. Not only do we have the Frankie and the Four Seasons fans, which is an official road manager set up Facebook page, but we have Charlie Calello's Lost and Found Facebook page. We now have the new Bob Crew Presents Seasons Connections and more, which it means that we're not only going to expand on talking about the Four Seasons and this Snapper box set, but we will be publicizing all the research that I've done with others since probably about 2002, looking at my computer records. So that's where we're at the moment, and we're hoping to launch the rest of these sessions through the rest of the year. As you guys are available, we can get a full team. So we're kicking off the discussion today with 1965, and we talked about this in the last session, and Mike Derrico focused in on the two Four Seasons albums that were classic from this period, and we'll touch on them in the second part of the session. But I want to start off by asking you guys about what you know, what you think, what you might have heard about how Frankie Valli wanted to have a solo career in the early part of 1965, and how that developed. So from your point of view, Lee, did Frankie ever tell you about how that developed?
Yes, but you know, it's my recollection of a conversation. Okay, so anyway, they handed me this pile of albums to learn because there were no music charts for the rhythm, other than the session, which didn't apply. And one of them was the one with the Frankie, up on the tray with the other guy. His first solo thing with My Mother's Eyes and all that stuff. And by the way, I did perform My Mother's Eyes with Frankie. When I joined, he dug deep into the archives to have a show. Not that he had to, he just did. But in any case, the truth is that as much as he loved the Four Seasons and all that, and I think you'll know some of these facts, Ken, his personality was manipulated by the other guys almost all the time. So he never had lost the desire to be the guy, and he's the guy, you don't have to answer to nobody. And it was more, I think it was more, from talking to him, it seemed more that, like, DeVito this and Gaudio that. Not that he didn't, it was his, if there's no Frankie, there's no Four Seasons. But the bottom line is with his own ego and his own needs, I think he really did feel manipulated and controlled.
Yeah, well, he obviously wanted Phillips to record him and Bob Crew to record him, and there was clearly a reluctance on the part of Phillips in early '65 because they felt that it might kill the Four Seasons as a group, because he might have more success than them, and they couldn't seem to come to terms with it. I know that Mike may have studied this situation, but it appears that the first recording that he managed to get done was The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore in July of 1965. And it
Which, by the way, is now a theme for a new TV show coming out.
Oh, wow.
It's like this guy could go to the bathroom and come out with a check.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. So he recorded it in July, but Crew obviously had problems persuading Phillips to release it. And it actually came out on Smash Records in September of '65. And it isn't a particularly complete recording. There's some bass missing in it, and and Valli's vocal isn't as perfect as it could be. But he re-recorded it 2 years later in full stereo in the studio. But Charlie Calello was present and did both arrangements, and so it worked. So that took them to number 128 in the chart, which, given the success of the Four Seasons, was okay. I mean, did anybody ever hear that version, or was it like me and the rest of the world? We all heard the Walker Brothers.
Well, the one that I played was the Walker Brothers with Frankie singing. Same background parts, the whole trip.
The Four Seasons were really big in New York City at the time, and yet I never heard that recording. And when I bought the Walker Brothers, I was shocked to see under, the writers, Crew and Gaudio. I said, well, why didn't the Four Seasons record? It's a great record. I never heard it. And I don't think any station in New York City played it. So Phillips must have just not released it to the right.
No, they didn't. They weren't interested in releasing it. So Crew had to shop around. He had a deal with Smash from previous years, and he managed to get it out on Smash label.
The only place I heard it in the Northwest was on a daytimer out of Vancouver, Washington, that covered the Portland market, and they had their own chart trying to compete with Kiss and the big rocker in town. But you could not buy a copy of that on the West Coast. I finally got my copy by writing Mercury Records, and they sent me a copy. That's the only way I could get a copy. You could not buy a copy, and you rarely ever see a copy of that on the in the used record market out west.
No, well, for the box set, we managed to. Well, it doesn't exist in the Four Seasons Partnership archive. So for the box set, we had to get a vinyl dub of it from a top collector in the UK, and that's gone to the engineer for remastering. But I did manage to do a digitally extracted stereo version, which came out very, very well, which is on the YouTube channel. And yeah, it is interesting to see how that was put together compared to the Walker Brothers. But obviously, only getting to 128, they weren't dismayed, and they went for it again. But this time, Phillips agreed to release the track. And Hurt Yourself came out in December 1965 as a second Frankie Valli solo single. And that got to 38 in Record World, but didn't break the Billboard chart. But that was Charlie's writing credits as well.
Yes, he wrote music for that. Yeah. Crew and
I never heard it at the time, so I don't know about anybody else.
No.
Well, those who were around.
Top 10 recording in New York City. You're gonna hurt yourself. It made the
Yeah.
top in New York City.
Yeah, and of course, it's a very it features Four Seasons on backing vocals on this occasion. So, and it's a very soulful record, and it's actually quite a hit on the UK Northern Soul scene, and it's coming out on the forthcoming Whatever You Want, Bob Cruz Soul CD on Ace Records in June.
So it has a little jazz influence to it.
It has, Anthony. I agree with you.
Jazz.
But there was a big change in Frankie's direction after that, when he started work with Bob Crew, and Herb Bernstein was the producer in early 1966, and they recorded at the sessions then You're Ready Now, and they recorded at the same time The Proud One with well, they were known the Angels, but they were a version of the Angels who sang backing vocal on that, and that only got to number 93 on the Cashbox charts, but in 1970 it got to number 11 in the UK. So it was a huge hit, and that was because it was played every weekend at the Twisted Wheel in Manchester in England, and became a floor filler, and is now a recognised part of the UK dance scene. But I heard it on UK radio, and I don't know whether it seemed to be the first Frankie Valli solo record that I heard on radio. Don't know about the rest of you guys.
First one I heard was Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
You didn't hear anything before that, no?
You're gonna
None.
hurt yourself.
None. And I heard them when he gave me the album to learn. And
Right. Well,
that was it, though.
well, they obviously, I mean, obviously there was a difference in complete style on You're Ready Now and The Proud One because of the girls. I did an article a number of years ago interviewing Peggy Santaglia, who was a member of the Angels, and obviously a very close friend of Bob Gaudio.
You think?
Very.
Peggy.
Yeah, I say, you think that she was a friend of his?
Yeah. Well, I'm being discreet and going on.
That was discreet. Okay, Ken. Sorry. Thanks for clarifying.
Yeah. Well, she was having a thing. She was having a thing with him. Yeah. We know that from Jersey Boys, and I don't think either of them
There's
did.
nothing sacred. Go ahead.
But it only matters what came out on the record, and then obviously the Proud One was recorded at the same session, and would later be a hit for the Osmond Brothers, but it didn't come out till October 1966, and it did get quite a bit of airplay in the UK, and I thought it was a great record. So there were two examples of Frankie Valli solo that were very soulful and very soul and pop orientated. So it was beginning to penetrate somewhere as a solo artist by that time, as it appeared in the UK. But of course, only Anthony and Chuck and I would be aware of this at the time, being the older guys in this group. But let's just ask Mike and Dominic when they first heard these early Valli songs before the big hit. Dominic.
My mother worked in a restaurant, Long Island City. It was an Italian restaurant, family owned it. And on the jukebox was Sherry. There was Frank Sinatra, there was Tony Bennett. And that's when I first heard it. I was maybe about 9 years old. And I loved Sherry. And I believe the flip side was Watch the Flowers Grow.
No, not Sherry.
What was
on that jukebox?
On a jukebox, maybe it was a reissue, but the flip side of Sherry was
before on the original.
Oh, yeah, but this one had Watch the Flowers Grow.
Well, it's
Watch
probably
the-
an old,
watch the
old
flowers
YouTube.
die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mike, what about you? When did you hear these early Valli solo singles?
Just a quick side note that I want to start off with. My dad is here and he's telling me the Proud One was a kind of a regional hit here in New York at the time. So that was, yeah. Again, I did not live these songs in real time. So growing up, you know, early childhood, these were songs that were always in my house. So they've always existed. I have no memory of hearing Can't Take My Eyes Off You or The Proud One or My Mother's Eyes or any of those initial solo songs for the first time. They just kind of always existed for me. You know, that sounds a little abstract, but it's just, it was very early childhood, so they were just always there.
If your dad had
You
the
know what I mean?
records,
Yeah.
unlike some of us, I mean, even I didn't have the records at this time. But the flip side of Hate Yourself is actually an instrumental called Nighthawk.
Yeah.
Which very few people are familiar with, but you know, it's one of only 2 instrumentals that the Four Seasons ever released on record.
Anything to get the publishing when you don't have a second
Well,
song.
yeah, if you can't find,
I'm sure it was improvised.
Sassy.
yeah, if you didn't have a B-side, Lee, you threw together an instrumental, did you?
You just the band that was there was like, okay, now let's do a jam, let's do this, and then they put some melody on it with Joe Cinderella or one of those guys on guitar, and Vinnie Bell, and boom, just like the Bob Crew generation, except that was a piece of music. I mean, that was done, well, with the team that we know. So.
Yeah. So so here Bearsign had sort of given Frankie this different sound, and then he was dropped and they moved on, and it wasn't until 1967 that they came together in the studio. By this time with Archie Schrock as arranger, and they pulled together this amazing song called Can't Take My Eyes Off You. And that was really the launch of Frankie Valli's second solo career, because obviously he'd had a solo career in the 50s without success. But now he was launched with a number 2 hit to be a huge solo artist. And you had to learn that chart, Lee. And
I learned it, I revised it, I modulated it, I put a new ending on it, I made it part of a medley. I had cake with it, everything you could possibly think. But I will tell you, my appreciation for the level of standard that the song has become and the value of the license came with age and education. At the time, I felt intimidated by it, so I actually somewhat kind of resented some of the previous success that actually paved my way as I look back. And now I realize the likelihood of having a career like Gaudio is out of 10, 0. Forget it. Forget it. You know, like Billie Eilish is like a unicorn. So the fact that now I realize things that I was told and didn't understand gives me such a level of respect for what the business could offer and what they accomplished.
So tell us a little bit about that as an arrangement, because obviously it goes along a sort of a nice, pleasant ballad, and then suddenly breaks out into this complete change of rhythm. And
I would tell you that as long as I know Frankie, of course I didn't meet him until years after that record, he loved big band jazz, and that's actually where I came from. That was where they found me, with like an 18-piece jazz band in Garfield, New Jersey. That was arranging for when I was about 18. So he always loved that kind of thing. Now, what's really interesting, Charlie Calello is the legendary arranger of everything that's a hit Four Seasons, except for my 2 favorite songs. Of course, I like Charlie, and I'm a big proponent of him being in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But Artie Schreck did Can't Take My Eyes Off You and Under My Skin, 2 of the finest charts on a pop record that I think I've ever heard. And, you know, I've had some wonderful stories. I don't want to sidetrack with you, but as far as with that, they took a shot, because at the same time, Larry Brown, who I spoke to last week,
Yeah.
Had Marianne all done. So
Yes.
Crew asked him, because Brown was a disciple, Crew. And he said, what do you think? He says, I think you should do Marianne. I don't think you should do the other one because it sounds too much like jazz. And Brown said to me, boy, when I miss big. And of course, they had a hit with Marianne anyway. But frankly, they were able to do the double. They were able to do Marianne and Can't Take My Eyes Off You, chart of both.
Yeah. One thing that I can say about the research that we did, one of the most amazing finds that I had was to find an alternative vocal and arrangement. Well, not a different arrangement, the same arrangement, but a different take of Can't Take My Eyes Off You. And Frankie's vocal is different.
Yeah.
The man had this ability to be able to punch a song or relax it, and the version that we found is slightly more relaxed.
Can I comment on that?
Yeah.
So we're in you'll know that I speak the truth because the memories come back so fast. It's 1973. I'm in the band for about 2 months. And the show, Frankie's not really comfortable yet. The new guys, me, Pulci, whatever it is, pre-Saccone, I think. Yeah, anyway, I get Clay Jordan or whatever it was. Anyway, we're in Framingham, Massachusetts, some god-awful place. And Frankie, we're doing a song. And Gaudio flies in to hear how the new band is doing. This is kind of an out-of-town trial gig. And again, Pulci's 20, I'm 19, has-been group, basically. And we do Can't Take My Eyes Off You. And it goes, da, 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 and I go, bing, and Frankie waits, as you're talking about. You're just too good to be true. It does kind of a Sinatra throwaway Bobby Darin thing with it.
Yeah.
Gaudio lost his fucking mind. I mean, it's the second most upset I saw him. The first is the What a Night lyrics. But
yeah,
the second was, are you fucking kidding me? Why don't you sing the melody that I wrote? You're like 2 fucking bars behind. You can't do that. It was not pleasant. And we went back in front of everybody. And we went back and did it again. And with respect to Frankie's staging, and he's not Sammy Davis, but he always wanted to be. He always wanted to be, like Sinatra or Al Martino or something. He always and that's why we did songs like, we didn't do Marlena, but we did I Got Love from Pearly.
Yeah.
What? I mean, what? No Candy Girl, but whatever by Stevie Wonder.
Yeah.
And he couldn't.
Yeah, but it's not as if you didn't do them well.
Doesn't matter. What are you doing? What are you doing? You got songs that are in top 5. You got 30 of them. But the truth of the matter is he wanted to be in Caesar's Palace with Sinatra.
Well, maybe some of you guys will have heard this alternative version of Can't Take My Eyes Off You I'm talking about, and you know what I mean about a slightly more relaxed style to it. But clearly, it was only the demo, or was only the acetate, and they went back and did it exactly the way we know it now. But
wait a minute, excuse me. As instructed by Gaudio, it is clearly audible.
Yeah. Yeah.
You would know, Kenny. You would know.
There was
it's
a
clearly
period,
audible that it's produced line by line.
Yeah, Anthony.
I don't know if this is the relaxed word, but there was a time, a few years, when he performed that live, he definitely sang it differently. He sped it up and he would clip off the ending. He wouldn't the verse.
There you are.
Continue to the end. He would sort of clip it off.
He over stylized it because he was bored with it, but who could blame him?
Yeah.
And he can't. He's him. So do what you want.
Yeah, well, he's still rearranging it today with Robbie Robinson, and
Robbie. I talk to Robbie all the time, and I said to him, Robbie, for 45 years, first I was changing the endings every weekend. Now you're changing them 40 years later with da 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 dee, da da da. It's unbelievable.
The concert on last Friday night, most of the songs, including Can't Take My Eyes Off You, were at a slightly slower pace than he typically does them.
I hate that.
You could tell they were different.
Can I tell you something? The hit records, if anything, you play them a little faster for live because people are energized. You know, you don't want to be going da 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 da, which was the tempo of the record.
Yeah.
You pump it up a little bit. But in Manilow does this too. All of a sudden, I'm like in Gershwin land with I write the songs. It's like I love both, but I was taught, and I was actually taught by Frankie, if you're not communicating with the audience, then who cares? You know how good you are. You know, it's like,
Yeah.
if a lady likes Tony Bennett and she's watching the Mahavishnu Orchestra, who cares how good they are from her perspective? So whatever. Anyway.
Okay. Well, obviously it launched the solo album, and that's a strange, and it got to number 34 in the chart, in the album charts, and it's a strange album in a way. And any of you can comment on this, because there was no mono version released, although there was one given a number of Phillips. But there was a re-recording of The Sun Ain't Gonna Shine Anymore. He also did a remake of My Mother's Eyes, which he'd recorded in the 50s. Ivy was on it, which was a spring 1965, spring 1966 Denny Randell song. And also there was The Trouble With Me, which was a Charlie Calello arrangement, but it couldn't have been recorded then because Charlie was still working at Columbia. So it must have been from 1965. So it was a bit of a hodgepodge, unless Charlie was moonlighting, of course, and came and did it at the same time as Can't Take My Eyes Off You.
That was the flip side of Can't Take My Eyes Off You, though, right?
Yeah, it was, but it was Charles Calello arrangement.
Recorded previously.
He was still, at the time of Can't Take My Eyes at You in April 1966.
Columbia.
He was still at Columbia. He didn't come back till June when Artie left.
Ken, I want to backtrack a little bit.
Yeah.
On Can't Take My Eyes Off You. To my ears, there are 4 songs that, from what Lee has told me about the chords that are in them, are really very similar to Can't Take My Eyes Off You. There's Can't Take My Eyes Off You, Dawn Go Away, Like You, which has never been released, and you provided us with a copy of it.
Yeah.
And More Than the Eye Can See, which was done by Crew and Al Martino.
Yeah.
Those songs all sound to me to have been done about the same time. And my question, just thinking outside the box, is why did they pick Can't Take My Eyes Off You out of that group, rather than the Ballad of Dawn or Like You or More Than the Eye Can See?
It was Cruise. First of all, they went with Dawn prior to it because Dawn was 66, if I'm not incorrect.
64.
64. Okay. And it's hard to believe my friend Sandy was 22. What a little life. Anyway, and then 67 was really the release of Can't Take My Eyes Off of You. But honestly, from my understanding, in those days, it was the producer's choice. Ultimately, the producer and his relationship with the record company was stronger than the artist because the producer was getting more.
Yeah, we'll come on to it in part 2, but I want to discuss actually with Mike particularly the role of Phillips during this period. But I'll pick that up in the second part. But I think Solo was thrown together because they had their hit and they had to get something out. Right. But there was a big delay after that until June '68 when they recorded the Timeless album. And that only, whereas Solo got to number 34, Timeless only got to 176. And the question is, why did, it's a sort of a fallen off the cliff, or was it just a case of it was too long between albums, or was it too much of a change of style to a Sinatra-like?
Well, it didn't have the big hit either on it,
but they did
Take My Eyes Off You.
They did Can't Take My Eyes Off You again by doing I Make a Fool of Myself.
That wasn't on that album, though.
It was, but it was released at the time.
Was it released at the time?
Yeah. Yeah.
But they didn't include it on the album for some reason. I couldn't figure that out, why it wasn't on the album.
No, but it was obviously an attempt to get back to using the formula. They always use the formula, as Lee's told us, how do they get to?
As did I. I wonder why is Can't Take My Eyes Off of You plus all those songs. If I may digress for 1 second to Charles, you mentioned all those songs, and none of them would be a problem because all the players are pretty much the same involved. So if they were influenced by themselves, or I was actually told by Gaudio, if they liked it the first time, they'll love it the second time. So, but the song that really is an issue that no one talks about, I may have talked about it before here because I'm old and I repeat myself. But that said, is the song Candy. Are you familiar with the song Candy? There's a song called Candy.
The chorus.
I love my sugar daddy, because he's my own candy. He's the one I adore. I love you, baby. And if it's quite, I mean, come on, folks. Today, that's a lawsuit today. Back then, who knew who Big
No, that was brought up. I remember that was brought up at the time. I remember that clearly.
I don't, so refresh me.
Well, in 1967, when that song came out, somebody said, "Oh, they're using the same chorus as the song Candy." But then,
exactly. I mean, it's a lawsuit. It's not even 2 bars. It's the full 4 bars.
For some reason, I guess whoever decided not to go ahead with the lawsuit, I don't know.
They were, you know what it is? They were probably convinced by the demeanor of the meeting.
Yeah.
Well, Anthony, who recorded it, and when was it released?
Oh, I have the original. I think the original was a big band song from the 40s or something.
That's correct. And it had a black woman, like an Ethel Waters style singer, big.
But I clearly remember them saying that they thought that was, a bit of perjury. What's the word?
Plagiarism.
Plagiarism.
But the truth is that it is. It is. It just was a different. It was like a different time. It's like, how did Ice Ice Baby pass doing the Queen lick? Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah. So, So Dominic has to perform these songs, some of these songs, and particularly "Can't Take My Eyes Off You." So, Dominic, obviously, it's a perennial song now because of Jersey Boys, but what's it like performing it on so long after it was released?
You get the same thrill every time you sing something like that. And it's amazing how when you come up to the part where everyone's singing, "I love you, baby," the whole place just goes wild. And I went to see Frankie a few weeks ago, Radio City, and I was just amazed with the young people in the audience. And I've had young people come into the shows. They know the lyrics. They're up, they're singing, they're dancing. It's electrifying. It really is. And to me, it's just fabulous to be involved with this.
Yeah. Well, the wish is that as a result of this research and box set, that the release of this set, it's only going to be 2,500 copies, but I'm certain that that's not going to be enough to satisfy a worldwide audience. I mean, how can a 44 CD, it's only 44 CD and not 50 CD like Al Stewart, how is a 44 CD box set going to satisfy a worldwide audience of Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons fans? It just doesn't seem likely.
And Ken, when they were making "Can't Take My Eyes Off You," do you think in the back of their mind, since Frank Sinatra was Frankie's idol, do you think in the back of their mind, it's like, what would if we did a song, what would Frank Sinatra pick? What would he pick to do? Because he did it, and he did it fantastic also. I'm just wondering if all this stuff has something to do, with the decision.
Right. He's right. He was Sinatra influenced. That's what he was.
They're all these things are interconnected in terms of appreciation, the way the music's created. But obviously, we've got to 68, and Frankie has a solo career now, and I'm not sure. I'll have to check again when the band became Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons. But at this point in Frankie Valli's solo career, the failure of that would come in the following years, really the bottom dropped out of that solo career. And we'll find out in the next section about 68 onwards, and what happened to really change things. But I have to say that my research and remembrance of this time was that this was a tremendous time of change from 1965 to 68, and I'll take us back to the beginning, and we'll go back to the Four Seasons. The music was changing so dramatically with the Beatles changing so much, with rock bands and surf music becoming dominant, Motown becoming so dominating in the charts on both sides of the Atlantic through 65, 66. And I was listening to basically all Motown. Then the Four Seasons sounded like an oldies group, apart from their focus on the hit singles, which we'll come on to. But there was a Four Seasons and there was a Frankie Valli during this period. But the Four Seasons had by far the greatest success between 1965, the start of 65, and 1968. They were still getting hits from VJ. Never on a Sunday got to 146 in the Cashbox charts, still being thrown out there from the VJ days. And then they hit big with Bye Bye Baby. Now, Lee, we've got to ask you about Bye Bye Baby and the chart on that. I had an interview with Bob Gaudio where he was pretty insulting of the construction of that as a song. That there wasn't anything special about it, and wasn't much in the arrangement, but it was part. It seemed to be part of the formula that he and Charlie had created for the group. And,
was Crew involved in that?
Crew produced it, yeah.
Okay, so here's what it is. Once Crew is set, then that's that. And especially back then, because Gaudio it was the same relationship, right?
Yeah.
Gaudio wasn't producing. So ultimately, you defer. And it's very possible that Gaudio was right and that he should have been listened to. But that's life. I've been there myself. And the bottom line is that I will tell you that the whole I'm the one girl that nobody gives a shit about that. We've been doing the same ending medley with the Hitman.
Yeah.
That we did when I joined Frankie in 73.
Yeah.
50 years ago almost. And all you do is the build up and the chorus at the end, and the audience goes bananas. And
because
you can't follow it. That's
you finish on that big harmony note at the end.
That's it.
And that brings the house down.
And you're done. And once that happens, people know, okay, get my coat. Because there's no following. And it's been that, it's Charlie's arrangement. And it's been that way unless Frankie's.
I don't know when they first started to find that ending. Anthony.
That's actually from the late 60s. Yeah,
I know that.
They did that medley. That was the close. And in those days, they would actually finish with I've Got You Under My Skin. That was their close.
Well, yeah, because they have the Never Wins to do for the bows.
Yeah. He would say, I'm dedicating this song written by the great Cole Porter. And that was it.
But those late 60s concerts were classics, Anthony, weren't they? Because they had so much to fall back on then, because they'd come through the peak, which we're gonna talk about. So all these songs really contribute to that concert period. But I'll come to that, and I want to talk about the late 60s in the next session when the group was falling off a cliff. But at this time, they were riding high because Bye Bye Baby launched the Entertain You album. And really, I want to bring Mike in here because really the big output from Philips of original albums to compete with the rest of the market during 1965 was the Entertain You album and the Working My Way Back to You album. I'd like to get your comments, Mike, on the comparison between those albums, because you've commented on them before.
In terms of their
Yeah,
the way they service competition against everything else.
they're very different
Yeah, it was
albums.
a transition. Yeah, definitely.
You see, Entertain You is falsetto laced, you know, in the same way as all the previous Formula tracks had been. Obviously, Bacharach David, which and Entertain You came out in March '65, and it had some show tunes in it, and it still had the falsetto formula, but Bacharach, Dylan, David, which didn't come out till late '65, was not a falsetto Four Seasons, and neither was Working My Way Back to You. I don't think there's any falsetto in Working My Way Back to You as an album. It's all straight Four Seasons harmony. And
wait, no, that's not true.
No.
Baby, don't you know? No, I'm sorry, wrong song, Kenny.
Well, Toy Soldier had been,
Yep.
you know, was going to be such a big hit in '65, but failed dismally, and everybody in the team believed in that song, and Betrayed even got to 90. Although Toy Soldier got to 64, Betrayed, the B-side, which many fans felt should have been the A-side, was such a high falsetto chorus, and everybody loved it because everybody loved the falsetto sound. And they also did, and Gail Come Running came out at the same time, but that wasn't so much falsetto, but it still made number 30 in the charts. So it wasn't till later on in the 60s that their singles started to change. And this is you know, where does the Four Seasons sound change, and who actually killed the Four Seasons sound? We'll come on to that over the forthcoming sessions, because it lasts all the way through till Lee in 1976. So,
well, 3.
What do you think? What do you think about the change from falsetto to straight songs, for want of a better description?
Are you referring?
Yeah, Lee. You know, you.
What do I think of it? I think that you made a statement before that people loved the falsetto. That it was true until Frankie sang falsetto, and then it was Frankie's falsetto. He owned it.
Do you think that Frankie couldn't keep up the falsetto in terms of live performances?
He was doing it when I got there. He could do it, but they, as I say, number one, he wanted to be something that he wasn't. He's always going to be the guy from the Four Seasons, as though that was a negative. So that's number one. But number two is that he had this image of that if you played Caesar's Palace, you had made it. He didn't realize the status that where they were and what he wanted to be, because he wanted the attention for himself, you know. So it was pretty much driven like that. But I will tell you something. I know from Gaudio, I know from Crew, I know their successes and I know the failures. And the whole frickin' thing is trial and error. That's how penicillin was invented. That's how all there's no, you gotta go do it. And unfortunately, as is with Street Fighter, that sucks, or watching the flowers grow, which equally sucks, because it's chasing a style that's, you can tell it's not emanating from their level of creativity. It's emulating to try and have a hit and fit back into something that you feel like you're slipping out of. And truthfully, Gaudio was not a profound writer. He wrote Who Loves You, it's the same chords as Sherry, but it's a record. And they got the thing.
When he came to Let's Hang On, he didn't have, it wasn't his influence that created that massive hit. Because it was Sandy and Denny working with Crew, and then working with Charlie. And Charlie wrote that into the structure that it is.
So many things, and I won't go into it because with me, but me included, have created key parts that in today's day, with an older guy, other than I was or even these guys were, is complete writer's credit. complete writer's space, and not just for me, for other members of the band who created things. And it would have, the amount that it would have cost to do the right thing. I'm not saying, I'm not being holier than thou. Who knows what I would do? But I'm here to say, their tongue was hanging out for a hit. They finally had that. But when an entire 3 minutes of a song is written by someone other than you should credit them.
Yes. Yes, you should. And obviously we do that with Let's Hang On. We've written about, and Charlie has written his story of how they created that and how they were trying to mimic Motown but couldn't get the sound, but in the process they found something else, you know. And Denny's confirmed it. And obviously I'm working with guys who have actually creating the digitally extracted stereo versions of that as we speak. The respect that song has, Let's Hang On, as a single. It's to me the peak of the 1965, 66 period. Obviously they finished the year with the stupid Don't Think Twice, It's All Right by the Wonder Who, but it was still
as stupid as it was, it was about that singer. I'm trying to think of the name that Frankie used to like to emulate. The little
Rose Murphy.
Thank you. And it was a novelty record. That's why they did it under a pseudonym. And it was a hit. It's hard to knock something that's a hit when you have two other hits. They had 3 songs on the top 10. That was the third one.
Yeah.
At the same time.
Yeah.
So shut up, Ken. No, why didn't that's not what I meant.
Yeah. I love the fact that they had the hit. Oh, we've got some echo somewhere. I don't know where, but anyway. But obviously by 1966, Working My Way Back to You came out and it hit number 9. And what a song, what a recording, what an arrangement. And it epitomizes the huge work that Charlie Calello did in the second half of 65. When
however, if you listen to the record, you'll find that it's about 2/3 as slow as you remember at the beginning. By the end, they speed up kind of a little bit. But at the front, I mean, I used to play it, and you got the pump and going right from the beginning. This thing starts like someone wasn't counting off correctly. But give it a listen next time you get a chance.
Yes. Yeah. Well, obviously, it was a big hit in the 70s, again, when it was re-recorded by the Detroit Spinners. And that obviously gave it the momentum and impetus that it needed as a song. And obviously in live performances, it's given that momentum, but that's not on the recording. But the whole of the Working My Way Back to You album has a drive and a vibe to it that is different, but it needed to be different because you were competing with Rubber Soul and you were soon going to be competing with other groups as well.
But it was still within the confines of being seasons related, which was also the success of Who Loves You. So in other words, Rubber Soul aside, yes, Gaudio certainly had ears for that. They were always chasing that kind of thing. But I think the success of the Working My Way as opposed to other efforts is the same as the success of Who Loves You in that, yeah, it's all different, but it still sounds like them. As opposed to
that's because Charlie says it was the same formula.
It was, and I'll tell you something else. All of the other records that I was a part of had and before me had studio singers and studio players, and they were done great, and they were crew productions of it, and it just sounded like a TV commercial. It didn't have, frankly, what doesn't exist in Frankie's world now, which is the gut. I don't blame it. It's not. I mean, it's 88. Do what you want. Re-record. Just live your life. But when I joined, the foot stomping was still in the show.
Yeah.
Not literally, but you felt it.
Well, Charlie left and Artie took over because Artie was a school friend of Charlie's and he knew all of the formula. And he was an ideal.
And he's a genius. He's a freaking genius.
You
ever hear him play Vibes? Oh my God.
Yeah. Well, he was writing great songs at the time with Jet Loring, and some of his songs, little known, are absolutely fabulous. Songs that he's written and stuff that he's recorded is great. and I loved the way he was into soulful tracks, the same way that Bob Crew was. But we then got Opus 17, which was basically Linzer Randell at their peak. And Don't You Worry About Me, hit number 13. So the seasons were riding high on the strength of the previous hits.
The horn parts have become a given by now. Now, when you heard a Four Seasons song, it had horn parts.
The horn parts of what, Lee?
What I'm saying is that at this point in time, everyone had now accepted that the Four Seasons records had big horn sections on them.
Yes. Yeah.
As opposed to Big Girls Don't Cry with Charlie's Father, the little thing, or Jerry or Dawn. Dawn was orchestrated, but now it was like, okay, full out. Can't take my eyes off of you. Let's hang on. Work on my way. Everybody has horns now.
Well, it would get even more horns focused, because that was the way music was going. If you listen to the music coming out of Detroit and the South, Muscle Shoals, there was so much so much brass in productions that it was.
Kenny, and who wrote da 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 da? Who do you think wrote that?
I don't know.
Well, it has to be Charlie. It's not part of the song. I'm sure, just like Charlie wrote "Bang Bang" on chimes and all that.
Oh yeah. The chimes are infamous.
What would it be without it? What would it be without it?
But the result was that because Denny and Sandy wanted, because they've been doing a lot of other stuff, which I'm going to cover in the Bob Crew Presents Facebook page. They were doing lots of other stuff, which was massively successful with people like the Toys.
Ken, can I pick up on what Lee just said?
Yeah.
About the horns is, in addition to those horns, Opus 17 and things like Working My Way Back to You, if you listen to both those songs, those are very bass-driven songs.
Absolutely.
So whether it's like Calello or Joe Long,
it's Calello.
Yeah, Working My Way Back to You.
I don't believe Charlie's playing, but I can tell you from being on the sessions, every note is written. Every bass note, it sounds like it. Even the ones that sound improvised, he wrote them. And then, when I was on Swearing to God, Gordon Edwards changed a little bit, and Charlie was elated because it sounded great. But nonetheless, in those days, it was, if you didn't photocopy it and play it, he had a problem. And honestly, obviously he was right, because it's kind of worked on the record.
Yeah, well, when you think about what happens is to answer the question that Ken presented to us, what killed the sound. I don't think the sound was killed, but this is transitional, where when Nicky leaves, they cease to be a vocal group and they become more of a musical group. And you hear that in the musicality of the horns. Again, those bass-driven grooves of Opus 17.
Respectfully, the whole silly girl, it's kind of over. And they got Joe Long, who wasn't quite as present, but was in that register and kind of foggy. But, it's amazing. Things look like bad news. I mean, good news, bad news. It's like, yeah, we lost Nicky, but on the other hand, we don't do silly girl because it's just passe now. And maybe they'd have stayed with that had Nicky stayed, because that was his strength. So, as I said, the whole thing is an abstract painting. You throw shit, you start moving it around, it becomes a masterpiece, or it doesn't, and you do the next one.
Well, it's about evolution, isn't it, Lee? Because time evolves music and arrangements, and technology was changing at the time, and recording skills and 8-track and 16-track.
You want to compete, so you keep trying things that other people are doing.
Yeah.
Until you're in the height of the disco era, and Larry Brown has a hit with Tie a Yellow Ribbon. And then you realize that none of it fucking matters.
No.
If you want to have a hit is a hit is a hit. And you got to get, the name of the game is get someone else to believe your dream.
Well, yeah. Well, obviously, the competition was huge in early 1966. And when Denny and Sandy left because of the contractual dispute with Bob Crew, because obviously it's all about money, and they wanted a greater share of the money, particularly bearing in mind how successful they've been with the Toys. they were working with crew quite intensely on other songs and other artists. But that happens in the music business. But there was a big hole in the Four Seasons writing at that time.
You think they were trying to get away from the doo-wop sound too?
Yeah, well, obviously it tried to do that throughout 1965.
Well, which was absolutely necessary.
Yeah,
it had to be. And the way that they discovered the block harmonies, the way they ended up, I mean, Sherry was great. And basically they applied the same principle to Working My Way and all that stuff. But what was really cool about it was the way it adapted to the new kind of track. So that's why I was saying people could say, oh, I think this is something. And it's those guys. The recognition is what, in my opinion, made it work. And it's like, well, who is this? And even though it was different music, you still knew.
Yeah. But obviously Guardio made a decision and changed everything. And I've Got You Under My Skin was the masterpiece of 1966.
Yes, it was.
Because it was revolutionary in terms of the style, the sound, the direction of the group, and gave everybody who was buying music and collecting music at the time a completely different perspective on the group.
And they did it as a tribute to Sinatra for that whole Caesar's Palace debacle.
Yeah, but the arrangement is so complex and so diverse.
Artie is magical, and just that this has nothing to do with anything, but I'm going to brag like I always do. I sat down in Media Sound with Artie Schreck sitting next to me and played his introduction for him, and the guy welled up a little bit, and I said, for me, this is the whole fucking thing.
Yeah. Well, a bit of something that I discovered in research, which I didn't know before, was that at the same session they recorded the Puppet Song. The Puppet Song was obviously back to the formula, but it never got single release and would appear on the New Gold Hits album a year later. But I just found out that it was recorded at the same session as Working My Way Back to You. That was a huge hit, got to number 9. I've Got You Under My Skin. I've Got You Under My Skin. And then,
guys, one of the things we haven't touched on is the audience and the other bands that make a group success or failure. I don't know how it was on the East Coast or in the UK back in 65 and 66, but the music was changing. And when you would hear the bands playing at school dances or in the clubs, they were playing the songs of the Eagles or Simon and Garfunkel or some of the other groups. They weren't playing Four Seasons songs. So other than on the radio, you never heard the Four Seasons. And if you weren't aware of them in the record stores, you wouldn't even know what they were doing. They had no follow-on publicity to support their sound. They were an island on their own out in left field.
Charles is completely correct. When I was in 66, I was 13. So I was in junior high school playing in bands and playing the music of, like Little Latin Looky-Loo and Mustang Sally and Hold On, I'm Coming. And then even doing like some Doors, maybe Light My Fire. No one ever played a Four Seasons song, ever. For some reason, it never was a cover band thing.
The groups I was listening to were playing Knock on Wood and The Midnight Hour.
Us too, exactly right.
And Come See About Me, and they had a saxophone.
Right.
This was magic. This was in Liverpool. This was in, cavern type clubs.
This was in Glen Rock, New Jersey, in junior high school.
Yeah. So everywhere people were getting into live music and live group sounds. But it was a reflection of the music on the chart, and the Four Seasons weren't always on the chart. And although they were
perceived. The Four Seasons, at least to me, were always perceived as a recording group. Now I know they toured and they supported their records by touring with, having 4 guys with the organ and the drummer and the whole. And I guess that was all acceptable at the time. I'm sure it was great because it was really them. But their records sounded like recordings as opposed to captured performances, which was more like the Yardbirds and the Birds. And they were bands. They'd come out and sound just like everything. Meanwhile, the Four Seasons are out there without the chimes, without the timpani, without the line.
Yeah.
So something new had to happen, and otherwise it was going to fizzle. And it kind of
well, their focus was on. I'm talking about Philips here because I think Philips had a huge. Were hugely at fault in the way they promoted the Four Seasons at the time. They didn't do enough promotion, and they just wanted singles out of the group. It was a totally single focused time. They released first gold vault of hits in '65. They released all the tracks that they'd inherited from VJ in '66, and so we had 2 gold vaults of hits issued in '66. But no new original material. So everybody who was absorbing any Four Seasons music was absorbing them as an oldies group spanning from 62 to 66.
Yeah, well, they call that fulfilling an obligation.
Yeah, well, that's what made them money. They sold more albums in 1966 than they'd ever sold because of the previous hits. And
hence the oldies record.
Yeah.
Hence Frankie and Bobby buying all their masters back. They were visionaries, the first guys to do it.
And then throw in the 4 guys from Liverpool.
Oh yeah, obviously. Yeah, of course they changed everything by writing their own songs. And of course, having lost Linzer and Randell, it became a big onus on Bob Gaudio to write songs during '66. But he did come up with Begging with Peggy Farina.
Yeah, which has been covered like 35 times and is being covered now.
Yeah.
Every commercial. If you just wrote that, the kids would never have to work.
But you guys might have heard the demo of that song, and isn't it classic to just hear Peggy singing it and Bob at the piano, and you know, this is a box set that we managed to find that by chance, because we pushed Bill Englert, the guy who was commissioned to transfer the tapes to us, to dig out everything with a Four Seasons link on it, or Frankie Valli. And at the very last knockings 2 years ago, he found that track, plus What Good Am I, which we never knew ever existed, which is on the same tape, which is a classic piece of Valli demo. But there are 200 tapes unmarked from the 60s and 70s, and they've not been researched. Nobody's listened to them. Nobody's delved down into what could be possibly there. I'm sure there's an awful lot of alternative stuff there, but I'm afraid that's going to have to be for a future engineer to research. But Bob Gaudio has got to pay somebody to do it. Whether he will or not, we will have to find out. But obviously,
things have been slow for Bob lately.
They've what?
Things have been a little slow for Bob lately.
Oh yeah, I mean, it hasn't been earning the mega millions from Jersey Boys, but it's just closing in New York, isn't it?
Yeah. Yes.
It's unbelievable. It has a life of it's like a creosote.
Yeah. Well, we'll get back to Jersey Boys, and particularly the closing section of Jersey Boys in a future session. But just to close this session down, we reached May in 1967, and Philips decided that because they hadn't issued any original material, they better pull an album together, and New Gold Hits, which was a stupid title because they weren't gold hits. It was just cashing in on the previous gold vaults. Came out, which was a mixed bag of sound in part, a return to falsetto in part, a track by the Wonder Who, and some soulful Valli on songs like I'm Gonna Change, which became a huge hit on the Northern Soul scene, and is coming out on a soul set that I've helped to produce in June this year. Anybody have any thoughts on that album?
I have a few thoughts about this record. This is probably the if we think about it, this is their most transitional record, because it's the only one in the catalog through the 60s and probably the 70s where the electric guitar is most prominent in the mix, where it's above the rest of the mix, where you hear electric guitars, where the seasons actually sound
Which record is this?
remotely like a rock band. This one here.
This is the new
Wow.
Gold Hits album.
Yeah.
It has tracks like Beggin' and
Yeah. So you got Beggin' and Tell It to the Rain and Come On Marianne.
I'm gonna change is the
That has
outstanding
horn.
track. Yeah,
He's right. Absolutely.
there's a lot of horns in there as well.
Yeah.
A lot of horns and a lot of electric guitars, and you never really hear that again. You know, where they really sound as much like a rock band as they've ever sounded or will probably ever sound again.
Also, if you listen, I don't know whether it was the same time period as Ken or not, but even Come On Marianne started with bang, 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 you know, so they were trying to get, Gaudio always, it's amazing. He wanted to get away from what Crew was all about, which was making it hit. And he wanted to be some kind of, Crosby, Stills and Nashy, coolest edge, Grateful Dead-y kind of rock guy, but he just wasn't, And the songs that he did best with sound like hits, and the other ones don't sound best.
Yeah,
that's just how it is.
Yeah, well, to the end
At
of
the time,
yeah.
At the time it came out, I was going to college in Oregon. We had a lot of Californians up there, and "Come On Marianne" was thought to be a knockoff of a Doors.
No, it's the other way around.
It's the
I know that, but
Okay, the other way around.
the introductory riff in the song,
Because
where the
we-
Doors stole the opening riff.
Yeah.
Larry, by the way, Larry sued. Larry did sue and lost.
He did.
What?
He said
Larry
he did.
Brown sued over that.
What was that? Touch Me?
Yeah.
For Touch Me, right?
Yeah.
And he lost.
Yeah.
It wasn't
Well-
you can't copyright your arrangement. That's just how it is.
They close this period with obviously they're moving into. They should have called this album "I'm Gonna Change" because that's clearly what they needed to do, and that's what they had started to fulfill, as Mike was saying.
Underneath, I've got to change, and underneath in parentheses is because I've shit myself.
Yeah.
They followed the trend of the
He should be
distorted
a
cover,
comedian.
the distorted photo with the the heist over here with the truck. But
It's just Frankie.
The distorted lens was kind of like in vogue those days.
It's actually Frankie going back to his roots, back in 1955.
He should be Baba Bank. Do what you know.
in the back of a van or a sedan.
The Brinks truck.
I want to go back to one of the things I was talking about a few minutes ago.
Yeah.
About the fact that the Four Seasons songs were never played by other bands, and to comment on some of Mike's comments on what killed the season sound. I think the Four Seasons, rightly or wrongly, no issue with that, but they had their own visions of the world and where they wanted to be, but they didn't understand that the market was such that you had to get that cooperation out there for other people playing your music so that more and more people would hear it, because the radio stations were just not hearing it or playing it.
Well, Charles, the reason was at that time that Bob Crew had disconnected from them because he was totally obsessed.
Yeah, he was out of it. Yeah, I
development
understand.
of China Voice and Mitch Ryder and the Detroit Wheels and other groups. He
Which
was
was also
Barry
Larry.
Brown and the Distant Cousins. Who's ever heard the Distant Cousins? Not many people. So there was a disconnect with Crew, and I think also Crew was overstretching himself. We'll come on to that in the next.
If you look at their competitor out in Hawthorne, California, at the same time,
Yeah.
when they decided to go on their own and went to a different record company, almost the identical thing happened. People weren't listening to their music anymore, and their sound wasn't picked up by the stations, so nobody knew. I've talked to people that never knew some of the songs they had. Same as the Four Seasons songs; they just didn't know about them.
Well, they finished this period, and really, it's the end of the golden. It's the end of the golden period with "Watch the Flowers Grow," which we know Lee doesn't think much of. They had the Magnificent Raven, which was Formula again, falsetto Formula, and then "Will You Love Me Tomorrow." Well, they got into the charts again. They were 30 with "Watch the Flowers Grow" and 24 with "Will You Love Me Tomorrow." So they were still doing reasonable, but not.
Will you love me tomorrow? And that reminds me. I think was it that or no? Is it just
Yeah, and that reminds me comes later. In
okay. So those two were the last of the Four Seasons sound.
Yeah,
that resonates in your head.
Well, that brings us to the end of reviewing this period.
Honestly, I might add
what's in the box set, but I have got some. Really real news and new discovery, and you're the first to hear it, guys, because today, you know that I'm good friends with Gene Thomas of the Ragdolls, and of a zillion other songs, backing arrangements during the 60s, and I've got her logbooks. She photocopied them all for me of everything she did between 1963 and 1970, and I had a feeling I saw something that, yes, I did. I found several entries related to Saturday Music, which was Bob Crew's moniker. And in 1967, on the 16th of June, 1967, she did background vocals and demo to two songs. One was Watch the Flowers Grow, and the other one was The Singles Game, which was then known as The Game. And so
you have that? Do you have Watch the Flowers Grow with this woman singing? Is that what you're saying? You
sang a demo. She sang the original demo, yeah. Gene.
You have it?
I don't have it, no. Like many of her demos, they're impossible to find, but if only we could find it.
It was like
Lee wants to burn it. Lee wants to burn it.
Well, Lee wants to burn it. She probably said
the date was nice, but you got to sleep over, or I don't give a shit.
Probably sang it as a really nice melodic ballad, but it's great the way everything interconnects, and we've lots to say in the future about Bob Crew, and next time we'll move on to 1968 and the infamous investment in a new sound, which Bob Gaudio had been gestating since 1966 as a new direction for the Four
Yes, and then he regurgitated it as a Helicon.
He regurgitated at Helicon. He tried it as Genuine Imitation Live Gazette, and that's where we'll start the story of Genuine Imitation Live Gazette and all of the failures that led through to 1970 in our next session.
And the bravery attached to it, respectfully.
Oh, the bravery attached to it, yeah. But I think one of the things we'll see is that Philips invested massively in trying to take them in a new direction. And when it completely failed, Bob Gaudio had to face the music, as they say. But more of that next time. So I don't know if you guys have got any closing comments on this period that you want to make.
I never liked Dominic. Just never liked that.
And I have to get ready tomorrow. Being an Italian New Yorker, I have to prepare for my shepherd's pie that I'm making in the morning.
Oh, shepherd's pie!
Because Tony wasn't here when you put down pasta.
Well, no, he wasn't. He wasn't. But Tony, I have to read you and Anthony raving about pasta and sausage. I mean, sausage doesn't go with pasta. To me, it goes with eggs, chips, and beans.
Different. Sausage, chips, and beans. If you live in England for the cuisine,
yeah.
Ken, that sounds something like something I ate when I had the munchies.
The food is gray. The food is gray like the air in the cars.
Dad, you've got to get some education in food.
Yeah, I'll get Mark to take me to a top Italian restaurant in Liverpool.
Italian-American food.
Italian-American food, okay, yeah. There's a difference, is the point.
Absolutely correct, yeah.
See.
But if anybody that calls veal parm a scallop of veal with cheese,
yeah,
I can't eat there.
No.
Veal parm.
All I can say to close is, Dominic, we wish you well with your forthcoming gigs.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
The news for you guys is that I'm going to Liverpool to see Frankie on the 28th of June.
Wow.
Wonderful.
Wow.
Just
You know,
got
Ken,
Say hello.
the show last
Give
Friday
us
night
a
here in
review.
Reno was wonderful.
Reno was wonderful.
It was a new, totally relaxed Frankie. He wasn't uptight like he is sometimes on stage. He was relaxed. He was a little bit slower. He had the guys backing him covering some of his parts. And the flash mob of women at the end was just incredible to watch.
Amazing.
Well,
It was like the whole group
truth of the
behind
matter
us just
is
charged the stage.
he's our generation's Sinatra. He's an
Yeah.
icon like that.
Yeah.
So if he sings or he doesn't sing, it really doesn't matter. They want to see the man stand
right.
there. He's 88 years
That's all about. That's all it's
It's a
about.
miracle.
Yeah.
It's a miracle. And I know his health isn't great, so it's even more of a miracle. Anyway, Kenny,
Okay,
let's
thank
let
you.
Kenny run.
Thank you guys for all your
Good to
contributions.
see you.
Ciao.
And
Ciao.
Ciao.
I'll get this up on YouTube next week or so. Okay. Take care, guys.
Until next
Guys.
time.
Thank you.
Bye now.
Bye.